Animal Cognition is full of richness of animal behavior, Win 2001, which can be confused with intelligence, which is defined as wide-ranging problem-solving abilities, Win 2001 again. Research on this topic should be carried out with caution as anthropomorphism and anthropocentrism can occur. So, the abundance of sightings on animals making and using tools has definitely captivated scientists into wanting to study the behaviours and the whys of their actions. Seidenberg 2010. Because of this, it provides questions regarding the animal's uniqueness within the world and just what level of cognitive functions they possess. So many people, scientists, researchers are motivated to find new findings that push them to want to understand tool use and its implications within animal behaviour and cognition. Amant and Horton, 2008. Tool use is widespread in many species, Hunt et al. 2013, and has been edited since the first definitions in 1970. So Van Lawick-Biddle defined tool use as the use of an external object as a functional extension of a mouth, beak, hand, or claw in the attainment of an immediate goal. It was then later stipulated that the object should be held. This definition is specific, yet allows the level of sophistication and the action to vary, allowing selectivity and of the appropriate tool use in question. Because of this definition is going to be mentioned in the discussion today. Right, so pan-troglodytes, chimpanzees, they use tools, specifically sticks and stones, as a method to acquire food. So Sugiyama in 1995 studied chimpanzees using sticks to catch termites. So chimpanzees, they would find sticks that were appropriately sized and small to fit hollows in trees, and they'd probe them to attract the termites to travel up the stick where the chimpanzees would eat them. Using their tongue, as you can see in the video here. Gasselschlacht Institute in 2022 found that chimpanzees in Guinea, they use a variety of stones as hammers to crack open nuts. It was also found that the differences in stones were driven by the combination of stone choice, availability, and the type of nuts that they were being eaten. This example is evidence of tool use. They are changing sticks and stones into an item that they are holding with a function that allows them to get food. This is based on Goodall's definition. If tool use is taxonomically widespread, why is it so rare, more specifically in aquatic animals? So it seems not as vast compared to land-based species based on research sites such as Science Direct and Scopus, but there is still research in the species. So in 2013, Mann and Patterson observed Enhydroleutrus, which are sea otters. They use miscellaneous items such as hammers or anvils to access hard-to-reach prey, as well as turtles, dolphins, facilitating sponge-like materials to protect their mouths whilst rummaging in the sand and the seabed for food and resources. So with any observation, there's going to be limitations when it comes to aquatic species specifically, such as a larger and deeper environment with lower light levels, or bodily postures limiting visibility, and additional information will have to be added for good evidence. Brown et al. 2013. Wiley and others in 2011 discuss underwater components of humpback whale bubble net feeding behaviour. They found that even tagging the whales once they found them still had memory limited data collection, and they lost plenty of observations through it. So there have been sightings of baleen species initiating tool use, such as the dolphin, and I want to evaluate the possibility of another species, the Megaptera novangeli, which is a humpback whale. They're known to be large and heavy, and they have adapted to this way through a change in flipper size, and allowed shallow water navigation and rapid acceleration and increased manoeuvrability. Cosma et al. 2019. They have been cited worldwide distribution using this diagram on the left here by Riley et al. 2008, and they have an estimation of 84,000 mature adults, Cook 2018. So, a paper by Buffer et al. And in 2022 explains humpback whales have very long migration periods in which breeding and calving occurs within it. They prioritise the hunting and feeding in the summer months to support the calving. Because of this, feeding techniques need to maximise prey catches for them and their offspring's health and survival rate. So two of the common feeding techniques that are used in humpback whales are lunge feeding and bubble feeding. So lunge feeding is when the whale will rush forward at a vertical angle from the bottom of the school of fish, break the water surface with their mouth wide open to catch as many prey as possible, like the photo on the left bottom there. Bubble feeding is more advanced because whales implement the use of bubbles by using their blowhole to create a lot of bubbles to trap fish and create like a cloud or a net. Afterwards, the lunging technique is then used. So the diagram here is bubble netting here. It's conducted in large groups that are then split into smaller groups that carry out a specific role. So the herders here, they contain the shoal of fish, preventing their escape, whilst the caller, the one below, positions themselves below and emits this really loud call, which is described as a deafening cry. The call drives the fish upwards to escape from it, and whilst this takes place, the ringleader here does a spiral around the fish and releases the bubbles from the blowhole. So it acts as a barrier so the fish cannot go out from the sides. And then all the whales will then congregate underneath, and then their mouths will go wide open and they'll rush forward up to the surface and consume as many as they can. So Layton and others in 2007 recorded bubble net feeding. This aerial view, bear with, here, it still leaves questions regarding what's taking place under the water. So the image alone cannot determine the type of feeding behaviour used. However, it does show the use of bubbles more sporadically, but it's not enough evidence to determine the proper functions of bubble nets. Patterson and Mann, however, state that humpback whales have been intensely observed for their foraging tactics, so bubble net feeding is technically quite well known. It's just the actual bubbles in the behaviour, they're not identified as tool use or not yet. So Hirota et al. In 2020 had a sighting of bubble net feeding during a southward migration. The whales would target fishes and krill. So the observations that they had gathered provide evidence of the feeding technique taking place and the potential tool use within it. So when you're looking at bubble net feeding as a whole, you're always going to have the question for researchers if those bubbles are tool use. And many would agree. So Doug Perrin in 2022 stated that scientists from 1989 had accepted bubbles as tools based on the sightings of our humpback whales using bubbles as a net. And within the article, Fred Sharp from Alaska Whale Foundation said that technically the whale's bubbles are a kind of tool in which its complex use within breeding and feeding gives it multiple uses, which is showing how the whale is pretty advanced. Now, on the other hand, if we're using Goodall's tool use definition previously mentioned at the start, yes, it is an extension of a body part on the humpback whale, but it doesn't correspond to her stipulated version of the definition in which it should be held. If we're basing tool use off her definition only, bubbles being used in this way cannot be classed as tool use, as the humpback whales are releasing bubbles and not actually holding them. So, Back in 1981, Kane and others wrote a paper on feeding behaviours on humpback whales, which they found the formation of bubbles. They described them as being either a cloud or a column, depending on its size. They then went on to describe the behaviours performed were the utilisation to maintain the naturally occurring concentrations of prey. But anything about it being tool use, it was just an adapting behaviour to the growing population of sandlance and herring at that time. So Hythus and Dill in 2009 mentioned that fish show a strong dislike to bubbles and are avoiding them, which is why our humpback whale has developed a feeding technique to maximise prey intake. In that article, they use humpback whale's bubble netting technique as a good example of tool use and explain that the bubbles produced are a tactic to manipulate the behaviour of their prey. This shows that the evidence of behaviour, bubble feeding, can be classed as tool use, as the bubbles are manipulating the function of a fishing net or a barrier to gain prey in which it is successful. Research also found that bubbles that are produced during the spiral increase the capture success of the net, Wiley et al. 2011. So similarly to humpback whales, bottlenose dolphins display a similar cognitive behaviour that maximises foraging tactics. Between 2012 and 2019, a group of bottlenose dolphins were recorded doing mud ring, a feeding event, where dolphins would lay in shallow waters and use their fins to create a mud wall. Fish fear the mud just like the bubbles, so they avoid it by jumping out of the water, leaving them vulnerable to the dolphins. So mud ring feeding can be defined as an association of sediments or use of sediment as a tool to help capture prey. Leatherwood 1975, Kane et al. 1995, Visor 1999, and Torres and Reed 2009. This proves many researchers believe mud ring feeding is an act of tool use. This can back up our idea of bubbles created by water are a tool to help capture prey in the same way as these dolphins. They have learnt that fish fear bubbles and direct them to form a net, showing that they have control over the fish and bubbles. Some more recent definitions highlight other points in regards to what can be classed as tool use. So Boyce's definition states that something must be held in a certain way by the operator. If this is the case, bubbles formed by the humpbacks could not be classed as tool use as they are not held in the mouth or attached to them in any way. Now Schumacher and others' definition, it is lengthy, and it is much more detailed. The definition can back up the idea of bubbles being tool use based on the tool being able to be freely manipulable. The definition also explains that the user, in this case humpback whales, must have control over the tool, in which we know they do, based on the clear evidence of bubble net feeding taking place and its successful capture of fish. So depending on what definition you are using to determine whether something is tool use, one may say it is and then another may say it is not. There is no definite answer for whether bubbles are tool use, despite other aquatic animals using similar methods to attain goals. Chimpanzees and other land animals, they use tools in different ways to aquatic species because of the environmental differences. We can try to observe behaviours. There will be limitations which vary depending on the animal. Despite our whales being large and the ocean is very vast, deep and dark, for us it makes it harder to find whales during their migration, so limited research has taken place on this topic. So, to summarise, more records of bubble net feeding can be used further to determine the overall choice of whether bubbles are tool use. Thanks for listening to the talk, and the next final slides are my references.